Hi, good afternoon. I am Julie Silverbrook. I'm the Senior Director of Partnerships and Constitutional Scholar in Residence at iCivics. I am going to ask my fellow judges to introduce themselves to you. Then I would like you to introduce yourselves to us. I will then read the question in full, and then you can begin your testimony. So now I will ask my fellow judges to go ahead and introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Tim Igo. I'm a writer, lawyer, and magazine editor at the State Bar of Arizona in Phoenix, Arizona.
My name is Nick Drummond. I'm an assistant professor of political science at Black Hills State University in South Dakota.
Hello, judges. We are all outgoing seniors representing Unit 2. My name is Rodney Berry.
Hello, judges. My name is Isabel Nodal.
And I'm Edward Lopez. Thank you for your time being here. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you. I am going to go ahead and let you know which question you'll be answering today. You'll be answering question 1, which I will now read to you in full. What were the major disagreements among the 55 delegates during the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and how were they resolved? What issues, if any, were not resolved, and what were the consequences? What changes, if any, should be made to the Constitution? You may begin when you're ready.
During the Constitutional Convention, there were many disagreements over what should and shouldn't be included in the new Constitution. One of the major disagreements was over the legislative branch and representation within it. Smaller delegates from the smaller states argued for the New Jersey plan, which would set up a unicameral legislature where each state got a single vote that did not adjust to the population of said state. While delegates from the larger states argued for the Virginia plan, which would set up a bicameral legislature where each state got a number of votes depending on how big their population was. This disagreement ended in the Great Compromise, or the Connecticut plan, which established our current legislature as we know it today. Another major disagreement between the delegates was over the issue of slavery. Southern delegates wanted their slaves to count towards their population, so they could have the same amount of voting power as the free northern states. While there was some pushback by the free northern states, the disagreement eventually ended in the 3/5 compromise, which counted every slave as 3/5 of a person. And one of the final disagreements was on the signing of the Constitution, where anti-Federalists wanted a Bill of Rights, but Federalists did not think that was necessary. The Federalists then compromised and agreed to make the Bill of Rights once the Constitution was put in place.
During this convention, there were things that were not resolved that we still struggle with today. The first was the Supreme Court not having a set amount of power. This was fixed when the court decided to take power for themselves and establish judicial review in Marbury v. Madison. Evidently, the Supreme Court can now overturn executive and legislative.
Isabel, I think you're on mute.
I thought I unmuted. I apologize.
No. You were off mute for most of it. We just missed maybe the last 30 seconds, and we have all done that, so do not feel bad about it.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yep.
Let me go back.
The problem is that she has her phone on at the same time. If she
Lisa, you have an echo.
If you could please turn off your phone, because she was having technical difficulties before we began. Our apologies.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, either turn off your phone or just mute your phone, so we're not getting, because there is a little bit of feedback.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready, why don't you start from the top on your discussion of the Supreme Court?
Okay. The first was the Supreme Court not having a set amount of power. This was fixed when the court decided to take power themselves and establish judicial review in Marbury v. Madison. Evidently, the Supreme Court can now overturn executive and legislative action as they see fit. Along with this, slavery was also one of the major issues discussed during this convention. Their version of a resolution at the time was only discussing the end of the international slave trade, along with the 3/5 compromise. The consequences of these actions are very apparent, as this allowed for human beings to be traded as property for 20 more years after the fact, as can be seen by Dred Scott v. Stanford. This, along with the strengthening of the South's ideals, would evidently lead to the Civil War later on in history. Fast forwarding to present day, this compromise has been looked at in a debate on whether or not to count illegal immigrants for state representation votes. Similarly, using their residency for a political gain. Along with the lasting effects slavery has had in our country and its connection to oppression, we are now in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement and in struggling to negate all influences of this pastime. The long-term consequences of these actions goes to prove Thomas Jefferson's statement that he would prefer dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery.
Benjamin Franklin once said, "Our new Constitution is now established. Everything seems to promise it'll be durable, but in this world, nothing is certain except death and taxes." The founders gave us, their posterity, Article 5 because they knew that slight changes would need to be made in order to keep forming a more perfect union. The first change that should be written into the Constitution is a set of term limits on members of Congress, similar to what the Florida State Legislature has, 2 terms in the Senate and 4 terms in the House. Doing this will help diversify and add new viewpoints to Congress while filtering out career politicians. Secondly, we should set a set number of justices on the Supreme Court. This set number would be 9 because that is tradition and has been precedent. Congress has refused to add more justices since the Circuit Judges Act of 1869. This would ensure that modern day politicians from either side of the aisle do not try to pack the court for political leverage. The last amendment would be to make all laws and regulations passed by executive branch members be overridden by Congress and make members of the bureaucracy liable. This would completely boost accountability on all parts of government, which should be something that all Americans strive for. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the first question. So you've proposed some changes to the Constitution. So one would be to keep the current number at 9. But earlier in your testimony, Isabel, you suggested that the power of judicial review gives the Supreme Court quite a bit of power. And I wonder if you could draw out for me what the checks on judicial power are that are spelled out in the Constitution.
Well, there are certain checks on judicial review, on judicial power itself. For example, Article 2 states that the president should nominate justices to the Supreme Court. Now, these justices have to be approved by the Senate as per Article 1, Section 3. So that in it of itself says that the president and the Senate must comply to make the judiciary follow in the footsteps of which those judges have made previous decisions, simply because presidents choose just the future justices based on their past decisions.
Another limit to the judicial review and judicial power as a whole is that if the judiciary branch rules that something to be unconstitutional, the legislative branch can push forward to make to overturn the ruling by passing a constitutional amendment, nullifying their ruling.
I believe that everything at the end of the day has to do with balance, and the things that we set forth to the changes or the things that we like about the Constitution is all taking into account the balance and the things that we can overturn if we don't agree with.
And of course, I apologize, I didn't know you were going to speak or not. If I may continue.
No, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that. So our founders put Article 1 as Article 1 because they knew the legislative branch is supposed to be the most powerful branch of the government. And this is simply a check on the legislative branch, because at the end of the day, if one party controls all three, both houses of Congress and the president, and it could be from either side of the aisle, I'm not trying to be political at all, they could simply pack the court. For example, there is a bill to currently place 4 new justices on the Supreme Court in Congress. And if this passes, it doesn't stop the other side of the aisle to pass the same bill for 4 more justices, and just continuing the cycle.
And let me just ask a follow-up question, if I may, which is, what is the danger of the legislative branch continually altering the number of justices on the Supreme Court?
The main thing that it does is that it weakens the judicial power by adding more justices. Makes it so that it's harder to come to agreements and act effectively on certain court cases, because it's hard to agree on anything with a multiple number of people.
I would say that I would agree with my colleague and say that, for example, if you add more currency into circulation, the value of that currency simply depreciates. The more justices you add into the Supreme Court, excuse me, the less people are going to trust that institution, because the more people you could just keep adding and adding and adding, corruption could one day become about.
I would agree with both of my colleagues, as all the amount of justices that we have now has seemed to work for the time that they've been set. And even then, with the number of 9, there has been a lot of conflicts, like with certain decisions, and adding more would just add on to those conflicts later on in history.
Thank you. I'll invite my other judges to go ahead and pose their questions as well.
So let me jump in. You took a very strong position on term limits. I appreciate your viewpoint. Given the size and depth of the civil service bureaucracy that runs, say, Washington, of permanent staff members, would term limits present a lot of problems for new legislators who might take a few years just to get up to speed?
Well, that is a certain topic of discussion when discussing term limits, and I do agree with you there. When one legislator goes out of office, there's obviously gonna have to be a new legislator. For example, if a certain legislator gets voted out of power, there was a legislator down where we live. She was from one side of the aisle, and they voted her out and put another legislator from the other side of the aisle, and that was a brand new legislator. That person had never been in office before, and he had to assemble a complete team of legislative assistants and aides, and that falls on their responsibility. And I think that when you circle out people that are currently in Congress, there's gonna have to obviously be more people trying to take up those jobs, be the chief aide and for that legislator, and there's gonna have to be more job openings. And I think it's gonna be a cycle. It's gonna be pretty difficult, but it will promote pluralism as James Madison wanted it to.
One of you mentioned the Bill of Rights, and I commend you for that. I believe that's the first time we've heard it mentioned today on this question. But I would ask you, this document that so many Americans seem today to hold as sacred, why was it that individuals like Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, at least initially, were opposed to the Bill of Rights? And what was the Anti-Federalist critique, a response to that?
Well, originally speaking, the Federalists didn't believe that the Bill of Rights would be necessary, because they believe we just came from a tyrannical government. We are not going to go and impose a tyrannical government ourselves. That would be foolish. The Anti-Federalists rebutted and said, hey, at the end of the day, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And in the future, there may need to be a set amount of rights for the citizenry to have, in order to cherish that and to keep that sacred, so that the government in the future, that federal government, which has grown tremendously in size, cannot go and take those rights from them.
And for the anti-federalist perspective, you have to remember what they have just been through. For a long time, they have suffered under the tyranny of the foreign British government, which constantly impeded on their rights. So the idea of needing a Bill of Rights for at least anti-federalists was a must-have in order to ensure their rights and the rights of their children.
Adding on to what my colleague was saying, they were very cautious about how they were going to be treated in this new constitution and all the rules that they were going to be adding on now. So they really wanted it to assure themselves that what happened in the past would not happen again, and that their rights were going to be protected.
I think you maybe have 20 seconds left, so probably not enough time to pose another question, but if you have any closing thoughts you'd like to share, please feel free to share them. Oh, we're good. All right, and now we're at time. Congrats on a job well done. We're going to go ahead and give you a little bit of constructive feedback. I'll go ahead and start. I think you did a nice job of taking us through the sort of main points of contention in the Constitutional Convention. I liked that you brought the proposal you have about term limits and compared that to the term limits from your home state in Florida, and that you had a strong set of opinions on keeping the current number of Supreme Court justices at 9. I would have liked to see a little bit more explanation on the current checks in the Constitution on judicial power. You mentioned amendment. There's also impeachment. The Congress does have the power to alter the number of justices, so recognition of that would also have been appreciated. And I think one point I wanted to surface about the consequences of changing the number of justices is that politics, having the political process alter that number undermines the perception of judicial independence, right? If the justices are seen as political pawns, and I would have liked to have seen that drawn out a little bit more. Another point that I really liked was connecting the question of representation and slavery to modern discussions of representation and immigration. That was the first time today we've heard that connection made. I thought that was a really interesting one. I would have liked you to go a little bit deeper into that comparison, but I was glad that you made it. I'll go ahead and open it up to my other judges to respond as well. But overall, I think you guys did a great job.
So I follow Julie's points. I also appreciated the connection to your own local experience in Florida. So I think that was a powerful connection. I appreciated the strong, I think it was 3 proposals you had. So they were clear and set out very, very explicitly. That was very, very helpful. I also appreciated the conversation about immigration. Again, I think she's right. I think this is the first time we've heard it today. I would caution, unless you are making a strong political statement, that the term illegal immigration or illegal immigrants, especially when talking about people, is a very hot button issue. So if that's your point, then that's perfectly okay. But if you're just trying to be completely neutral and descriptive, I think undocumented immigrants is a term that we'd probably hear more often. And then I love the quote about a dangerous freedom. That's one of my favorites. I think, especially as we come out of 2020, it immediately made me think of Representative John Lewis's getting into a good kind of trouble. So thank you for that, creating that image in my head. Appreciate it.
So I echo many of the sentiments of my fellow judges. I mentioned the Bill of Rights during the Q&A there. I commend you for bringing that up. It seems like such an obvious point, but I don't think I've heard it today. So well done. I really like the sense of you really acted like a team. I thought you complemented each other very well. You knew when to come in, and I thought you worked very good as a tight unit. The part about the Bill of Rights, I think you did a great job putting it in its historical context, but I would like to hear just a little bit more about some of the theoretical arguments at play. The foremost being Hamilton's concern that, look, here's, and forgive me, I'm gonna use props here as if you're my college student, but here's the Constitution. This is an exhaustive list of powers. And I don't see anything in here about the federal government having the power to restrict speech or press. And if we add the Bill of Rights that does say, this is my right, we're gonna begin to think that the federal government can do whatever it wants, so long as it doesn't violate these 10 rights. Again, though, I thought you did a great job putting it in the historical context and really showing the kind of passion behind the view of the Anti-Federalists, why we need this Bill of Rights.
Thank you. Before we wrap up, I want to make a note about the timing. For the original presentation, I may have held up the sign about 30 seconds too soon. So keep that in mind when in your deliberations. But for the full 8 minutes, they were given that during the follow-up questions, just for the judge to take into consideration. All right, well, we'll go ahead and wrap up Unit 2